The rain came down in sheets that November evening, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you question every choice that led you to be outside. Sarah. Mitchell stood under the flickering streetlight outside the downtown bus station, her threadbare coat doing little to shield her from the bitter wind. In her arms, wrapped in a donated blanket that had seen better days, her 3-year-old daughter Emma slept fitfully, her small body shivering despite Sarah's best efforts to keep her warm. They had been homeless for 6 months now, ever since the medical bills from Emma's emergency surgery had swallowed their savings, and the eviction notice had arrived. Like a death sentence, Sarah's eyes, once bright with hope and ambition, now carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights and 1,000,000 whispered prayers that seemed to go unanswered. She watched the buses come and go, carrying people to warm homes, to families, to lives that felt impossibly distant from her own. Each departure felt like a door closing, another reminder that she had somehow fallen through the cracks of a society that promised to catch people like her. Emma stirred in her arms, and Sarah began to hum softly, the lullaby her own mother had sung to her decades ago, in a house that no longer existed, in a life that felt like someone else's memory. That's when she noticed the woman. She appeared like a mirage at first, stepping out of a sleek black sedan that seemed too elegant for this part of town. Everything about her spoke of success. The tailored coat, the confident stride, the way she moved through the world as if it would bend to accommodate her. But it was her eyes that caught Sarah's attention. They weren't the eyes of someone passing through, averting their gaze from the uncomfortable reality of people, like Sarah and Emma. They were eyes that saw, that registered, that felt. The woman's name was Diana Chen, though Sarah wouldn't learn that until later. Diana was a corporate lawyer who had spent the last 15 years climbing every ladder placed before her, collecting accolades and corner offices the way some people collect stamps. She was on her way to a charity gala. The irony wouldn't hit her until much later, where she would write a check for more money than most people earned in a year and feel satisfied with her contribution to society. She had been checking her phone when she looked up and saw them, a mother and child who looked like they were made of shadows and survival. Something in Diana's chest cracked open. She had been that child once, though the memory was buried under decades of achievement and carefully constructed success. Her own mother had held her just like that, in a women's shelter in Chicago, after her father had disappeared and left them with nothing but debt and broken promises. A social worker named Mrs. Patterson had changed everything, had seen her mother not as a problem to be processed, but as a person to be helped. Diana had sworn she would never forget where she came from. But somewhere between law school and her 6th-floor office, she had started to forget what it felt like to be truly seen. "Excuse me," Diana said, her voice gentler than she expected. "I don't mean to intrude, but are you and your daughter okay?" Sarah's first instinct was to lie, to protect what little dignity she had left. But exhaustion had eroded her defenses, and when she opened her mouth, the truth spilled out like water from a broken dam. She told Diana about the hospital, the bills, the eviction. She told her about the shelters that were full, about the waiting list that stretched into eternity, about the job she'd lost because she had nowhere to shower and no reliable address. She told her about Emma's persistent cough and the terror that kept her awake at night, the fear that she was failing at the one job that mattered most. Diana listened, not with the polite half-attention of someone waiting for their turn to speak, but with the fierce presence of someone who understood that listening itself was an act of love. When Sarah finished, her voice hoarse and her eyes brimming with tears she couldn't afford to shed, Diana didn't offer empty platitudes or quick solutions. Instead, she asked a single question that would change both their lives. "What if I told you that I can help? But I need you to trust me?" Trust was a luxury Sarah hadn't been able to afford in months. But something in Diana's face, a recognition, a kinship, a shared understanding of what it meant to be desperate, made her nod. What happened next unfolded like a miracle, though Diana would later insist it was simply humanity remembering how to be human. She didn't just write a check or make a phone call to ease her conscience. She canceled her gala appearance and spent that entire night making things happen. She called in favors from old law school friends, contacted a colleague whose family owned apartment buildings, reached out to a doctor she'd met at a fundraiser who agreed to see Emma first thing in the morning. She used her privilege like a battering ram against the systems that had failed. Sarah and Emma, and by dawn, the world looked different. But Diana didn't stop there. And this is where the story turns from simple charity to something more profound. Over the following weeks, Diana did something that surprised even herself. She didn't just help Sarah get back on her feet, she built a relationship with her. She learned that Sarah had been a graphic designer before everything fell apart, that she loved old movies and terrible puns, that she dreamed of giving Emma the kind of childhood she herself had never had. Diana introduced Sarah to her business contacts, helped her build a portfolio, and connected her with a small marketing firm that was willing to take a chance on someone, rebuilding their life. Sarah, in turn, showed Diana something she had forgotten in her climb to the top. That success meant nothing if it existed in isolation. That money was simply a tool, and that the measure of a life wasn't found in courtroom victories or corporate bonuses, but in the moments when you chose to see another person's humanity and respond to it. 6 months later, Sarah and Emma were living in a modest but comfortable apartment. Sarah had steady freelance work and was slowly rebuilding her savings. Emma's cough had been treated. It was bronchitis. Thankfully, nothing more serious, and she was enrolled in a preschool where she thrived. But the transformation wasn't just in their circumstances. Sarah had started volunteering at the same bus station where Diana had found them, bringing coffee and sandwiches to people who were living the nightmare she had escaped. She couldn't offer them apartments or job connections, but she could offer them something equally valuable. The knowledge that they were seen, that they mattered, that their stories deserved to be heard. Diana, meanwhile, had restructured her entire law practice. She now spent half her time on pro bono work, specifically helping families navigate the complex legal and financial systems that so often crushed them. She had recruited other lawyers to the cause, creating a network of professionals who used their expertise as a bridge rather than a barrier. She thought often of Mrs. Patterson, the social worker who had saved her and her mother all those years ago, and wondered if this was how that kindness was meant to ripple forward through time. The story could end there, with neat resolutions and satisfying symmetry. But life, in its infinite complexity, had one more chapter to write. One afternoon, Diana received a call from a hospital. Sarah had been in a car accident, nothing life-threatening, but she needed surgery and someone to care for Emma during her recovery. Diana didn't hesitate. She cleared her calendar, picked Emma up from preschool, and spent the next 2 weeks being, for all intents and purposes, a mother to a little girl who called her Aunt Diana and asked why the sky was blue and whether dinosaurs had feelings. In those 2 weeks, surrounded by picture books and childish laughter and the beautiful chaos of caring for someone else, Diana realized something profound. She had spent her entire adult life building walls of achievement around herself, terrified that if she stopped moving, stopped climbing, stopped proving her worth, she would somehow end up back in that shelter, invisible and forgotten. But here, reading Goodnight, Moon, for the 100th time to a child who wasn't hers but who trusted her completely, she understood that her worth had never been in question. It had been there all along, waiting for her to stop long enough to notice it. When Sarah recovered and returned home, she found Diana and Emma building a blanket fort in the living room, both of them covered in cookie crumbs and giggling like conspirators. The three of them sat together that evening, eating takeout pizza and watching the sun set over the city, and Sarah said something that Diana would never forget. "You gave us a home, but we gave you a family. I think that makes us even." Diana felt tears stream down her face, the kind of tears that come from a place of profound gratitude and recognition. "We're not even," she said, pulling both Sarah and Emma into an embrace. "We're just human, and that's more than enough." The story of Diana and Sarah spread quietly through their community, not as a viral sensation or a feel-good news segment, but as a whispered reminder that passed from person to person, that we are all closer to the edge than we think, that compassion is not a weakness but a strength, and that the barriers we construct between us and them are ultimately illusions we tell ourselves to avoid. Confronting our shared fragility, other people began to take notice. The marketing firm where Sarah started a program to hire people rebuilding their lives. Diana's law colleagues established a fund to cover basic living expenses for families navigating legal crises. The small acts multiplied, creating a web of connection and care that extended far beyond that rainy November evening. Years later, Emma would grow up knowing that she was saved by a stranger who chose to see her, mother's humanity in a moment when the world had turned its back. She would carry that knowledge with her, understanding that we are all capable of being that stranger, that every moment contains within it the possibility of transformation. That kindness is not a transaction, but a way of being in the world. And on quiet evenings, when Sarah and Diana sat together watching Emma play, they would sometimes talk about that night at the bus station, not as a story with a clear beginning and end, but as a threshold they had crossed together, moving from isolation into connection, from despair into hope, from a world that sorted people into categories, toward one that recognized our fundamental sameness. "Thank you," Sarah would sometimes say, though the words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what had been given and received. Diana would always shake her head. "No," she would reply. "Thank you. You reminded me why I became a lawyer in the first place. You gave me my purpose back. And in that exchange, in that mutual recognition of how profoundly we need each other, lay the real truth of their story. We are not saved by individual heroes or isolated acts of charity. We are saved by the slow, patient work of building connections, of choosing again and again to see each other's humanity, of refusing to accept that anyone is disposable or beyond redemption. The rain still falls on cold November evenings. People still stand at bus stations, holding children and hoping for miracles. But somewhere in the city, in the quiet spaces between stories, Sarah and Diana and Emma are proof that those miracles are possible. Not because the world is kind, but because we can choose to make it so, one act of recognition at a time.